Right. My name is Pfeuffer, and I will present the work about gaze shifting, direct-indirect input with a pen and touch modulated by gaze. And I conducted this work with Jason Alexander, Ming, Chong, Yanxia, Zhang, and Gellersen from Lancaster University. So this work is based on a pen and touch display. So we have two modalities, the pen for precise drawing and writing tasks, and multi-touch for manipulations. And current devices, what they have in common is they're all based on the direct manipulation paradigm. So any point that you touch is also the point that you manipulate. However, it is also known that direct input devices can be used indirectly. So, for example, on the left side, you see a pen that is controlling a mouse cursor that is offset from the actual physical position. And on the right side, another example for multi-touch. And why do people actually do that? So, because direct input obviously is kind of the natural way, very easy to use, and it's on phones, on tablets, and so on. And in contrast, indirect input allows to actually interact with targets that are out of your reach, because you do not need to reach your hand towards the target. And because your hand is not on the target, you also can interact occlusion-free. So our goal in this work was to bring direct and indirect input together. So essentially that you use one direct input device, but you can switch between either direct or indirect input. But then the question is, how can you actually switch between those two input modes? And for this reason, we decided, we designed the gaze shifting technique. And this is based on two aspects. So first, the user's visual attention, so where you're looking at, and then the physical input position of the input device. So in this example, you see that when you look closely to where you touch, it's processed as direct input. If you, however, look far apart, it's automatically indirect input on the target you're looking at. And essentially, gaze shifting is to allow the user to switch between those two modes. So we explored this technique based on the following system. So we had a pen and touch display, and we just attached an eye tracker at the bottom of it. And how the video is, it's working. So as you see, the gray circle there is indicating the user's gaze point. And if you're at some point during slides lost in a video or something, just look at the gray circle, because it always is the point of interest. So in principle, it would work like this, where you, so when you look close to the pen, you have direct input, and when you look far away, you control the point with indirect pen input. So, and this works based on this implementation. So let's assume that the user is looking at a point, and then there's this direct input zone around it. If you touch inside it, it's direct input. If you touch outside of it, it's indirect input. And this is based on a threshold, and this threshold depends. So it should be context aware, and it depends on which application, what kind of task, what kind of modality are you using, and was usually between 6 and 12 centimeters. And yeah, the rest of the slides will be about different kinds of examples. So when is gaze shifting actually useful? When do we need these two direct and indirect interaction variants? And based on that, what kind of new ways of interaction can we provide? So the first example is about menu interaction. So if you use a pen, you often want to change the mode, like the color, the brush size, and so on. And with gaze shifting, it would work like this. So you can, with direct pen input, meaning you look close to the pen, you can draw. And if you look at the menu, you can use the pen indirectly. And the step-by-step operation here is that you would first write normally. Then you look at the menu, and the menu gets emphasized automatically, showing you, okay, now you can interact with it. And by putting the pen down, you get an association between the pen and the menu. And from that point, you can move the pen indirectly to change the mode, as you saw here, from color black to color blue. And then you look back and continue with a new mode. So, and this principle extends to different kinds of modes and menus that are all across the screen. So you can change to straight lines, change the brush size, and again, and also change a different pen operation for drawing shapes, for example. And the underlying principle is a specific division of labor. So in the main canvas area, you have direct input with a pen to do your primary task. And around it, there are all these secondary tasks where you do the mode switching. And these are all used with indirect input from the pen. And this does not require you to move the pen out of your main focus area anymore. So the first example was about secondary tasks and how we can enhance that with gaze shifting. And the second one is about how can we actually use gaze shifting within main tasks of the pen. And we thought about this an application where you draw a path or shapes. And for this, usually you would tap on each of the points. These points get interconnected to a shape. And this example shows our application. So you want to outline the car. And you start it directly, but you can continue by just looking far off and use indirect pen input to continue this, the line. And how this works in principle is that first, if you look close to the pen, you can perform direct input. And if you do the same thing, but the pen is far apart from the point you look, you can do the same task with indirect input. And this works in a way that with gaze, you kind of select the rough area, and the pen is used to precisely position the point. And the interesting part is that across both direct and indirect counterparts, you actually have a consistent way of operation. So pen hover will always indicate the next point, pen down creates a point, pen drag refines a point, and a pen up will confirm this point. However, what's actually more interesting is the transition between those two input modes. So in this example, you can start with direct pen input and just look far away, and at that point you can continue with indirect pen input. And of course the other direction works well as well. So you start with indirect input, you look at the pen, and continue with direct input. And this is that's why this application works. So you start with direct input, and then you cross the whole screen to continue with direct input. And you look at each of the points and create them, while at the same time the pen is always held in the user's comfort zone. Okay, so this example just now was about you have one task, you can do it either directly or indirectly. And now I want to show something where you can interleave two different tasks into this whole direct and indirect mapping. So direct pen input is used to draw a path, and indirect pen input to edit the path that you have just drawn. So you start, so direct input, as you see, you can just draw normal points. And by moving the pen out, you can transition to indirect input. And if you look closely, you see there's a little mouse cursor appearing at the area of where your visual attention is. And this mouse cursor can then be controlled with pen hover movement. And if you found the position you want to manipulate, you put the pen down and you would manipulate the line. And this especially works well for longer tasks where you rapidly switch between two complementary tasks. And the mouse cursor enables you very precise control, similar to a mouse. And as the hand is out of your main focus area, you don't have any issues with occlusion. So overall, this application shows that you can interleave two complementary tasks into one interaction scenario with gaze shifting. However, our previous examples were all about pen interactions, and now I also want to show one example of touch, so the pinch to zoom gesture. And how does it normally work? With default touch, when you touch a single object, you manipulate it. However, if you touch the blank space in between, you kind of manipulate the whole world view. And we thought, how can we interleave these two tasks into the gaze shifting approach? And if you perform direct touch, meaning you look closely to where you touch, it's normal. It's like normal default touch, actually. And however, if you perform indirect touch, you can zoom into the world view. And indirect touch means you put the fingers deliberately out of your sight. And this is, as you see here, you actually zoom into where you look. So I'm looking here in this example on the top left object, and it zooms into this area. This is interesting in comparison to the default implementation, where you're kind of required to find blank space in between. However, if you would touch an object, you couldn't do the global zooming because you would manipulate the single object. But this problem is actually not there with the gaze shifting approach. And we think this can be useful in applications where you have a lot of objects, for example with images, and you can zoom in and out, and then move the hand into the view to quickly manipulate single objects. Okay, so the previous examples all focused on single modalities, and so in the following I want to show how gaze shifting can be integrated into a pen and touch bimanual context. So because there's a lot of research from like Ken Hinckley and other people who showed that there's a dynamic interplay between the pen and touch and two hands. So and we thought about 3 different bimanual configurations. The first one is direct and indirect input. So what you do is you have indirect multi-touch zooming with one hand, and you use the pen for direct drawing. And this results in an example like this, where you want to outline the finger, and when you want better overview, you just zoom out, and you're not required to put the hand into the point where you want to zoom. So you also are not required to put the pen away from that area, because direct and indirect input, they don't overlap. Yeah. So, and the second configuration for bimanual input is actually when both hands have total indirect control. So, as you see in this example, the multi-touch still does the same zooming in and out, and the pen is used for the mouse cursor control. So both hands are actually out of the main view of the user. So there's no occlusion, and you can. There are 2 methods that actually increase the precision. First, the mouse cursor control, and second, based on the zooming in and out, you get either more detail or more overview. And of course, the third example is about you can actually interleave all of these tasks within each other. So in this one interaction context, so you start with direct pen editing. You do a little bit of multi-touch zooming, you use the pen indirectly, and so on. And you see that all these 3 tasks are actually interleaved, and the user can easily switch between them based on the alignment of where you look and where you touch. But actually, well, if you look closely, your gaze is always focused on the main area, so there's no need to make like unnatural movements or something. Okay. So I want to give a quick recap on the examples, because there were a lot of different things. The first 2 examples were about secondary and primary tasks. So secondary tasks, meaning mode switching of the pen, can be made easier through the gaze shifting concept. But also you can integrate gaze shifting into the main task. And the second and third example were about, so the second example showed that you can do the same task of drawing a line and path with either direct or indirect input and switch in between whatever you desire at the moment. And the third example showed that you can map to direct and indirect input 2 different tasks. And then we focused on multi-touch, and we thought that you can actually interleave the local and global zooming operations into this direct and indirect mapping. And at last, we just combined all these examples and had these 3 different configurations of bimanual pen and touch input. So what we wanted to show in general is that gaze shifting is something that can be applied across different modalities, whether pen, touch, or the combination, but also different kind of techniques, because in each example we had a specific implementation of the interaction technique. And each example also had a different interaction context and task. So I want to conclude this talk with 3 points. First, we think that direct input devices can have an additional indirect input mode that is complementary to this direct interaction. And we think that gaze as a modality is actually quite ideal for this shifting between those 2 input modes. And at last, based on this principle, there are new interaction possibilities that we can use for different kind of applications. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. And happy to get any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Again, if there are questions, please step up. While we're waiting, I can ask the first one. So in some of your introductory slides, you say that there's a specific threshold that you decided on to switch between what's direct and what is indirect. Yeah. And you said that it's actually application-specific and things like that. Can you share a little bit more details about how you actually selected that threshold, especially in the examples that you show here?
So what I mean with like context-dependent or application-dependent is that for the menu, for example, it only matters whether you look at the menu or not. So I have a small threshold of like 3 centimeters or something. And then for other tasks, such as drawing with a pen, if the user just looks far away, I would just disable gaze shifting because it's kind of, it wouldn't make sense to have this method at that time. While for other more dynamic examples that I had this threshold of like 6 to 8 centimeters, which is probably prone to accidental activations, maybe. But you can also, so I also conducted a little user study, and you can, after a little bit of training, you can actually get used to this, and you exactly know how this works. And, but of course, further studies. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I think this brings me to the second question. Okay, I'll just one thing. You mentioned accidental activations, and even in your videos, I find it really hard to not distract it and to look at something else. How do you handle the problem that our gaze is not always really focused on our actions? I mean, oftentimes we follow, let's say a line over here and write that down perfectly fine with the pen on the side. It doesn't necessarily mean that we want to interact with what we are currently looking at. It just means that our gaze shifts around. So you have a lot of these cases of Midas touch problem, and it seems like you're thresholding that your threshold is one way of addressing it, but it seems like you're kind of fine-tuning that particular variable to suit your needs in this particular case.
That was a long question.
Sorry.
I'm
just wondering, how do you handle, how do you systematically handle accidental activation in this kind of case? Because if it really is based on your current task and current state of the UI, then it seems like, I mean, what are the pros and cons of handling that versus having a generic threshold?
I mean, of course, this is a very dynamic switching method, so you get the potential of error. But I think if you get used to it, it will be okay. And it's essentially a trade-off between this additional functionality and then, but on the other side, there are possible errors. And yeah. So I hope I could answer this.
Well, this is really cool. I really get excited about this kind of stuff. It's great work. I just had a question about, especially when you're switching or clutching into indirect pen, is because you're switching back and forth between direct and indirect. Do you find, and I saw in some of your demos, do you find you have to keep the gain at 1 when you're in indirect mode because you just went from direct mode in the pen? And I just wanted your thoughts on that. And I've also noticed you sometimes just use an offset, and other times you actually directly control a widget and not use a cursor when you're indirectly controlling the pen, some of those. And those felt like they had different gain, CD gains. So can you just comment on your experience there?
I thought a lot about this. So when you're in direct mode, of course, there's no need for CD gains or whatever, because it's always the same mapping. But in indirect, you actually have the freedom to apply different kind of things. Like for the mouse cursor example, there was this, obviously, a dynamic cursor acceleration. But I think one interesting thing is that with a pen, you actually have the hover information. So you can already indicate better whether you're direct and indirect is one thing. And of course, also have different CD gains. But with touch, it's a bit different. So because you don't have hover, so you could implement different kind of interaction models. For example, you could have the same model as a laptop touchpad, just dragging for dragging, but also you could have something like that directly manipulates it. So you touch down and you manipulate without any previous cursor dragging. So there are like different kind of options that are there, and there's no like clear answer, of course.
I was just wondering, because you switch back and forth a
Oh.
CD of 1, even in indirect, and you couldn't explore that degree of freedom, or it just became too confusing to always switch gains like that?
I didn't see any difference actually, but yeah, I mean, for the menu, I thought it was important because you had this grid menu and that it's kind of the same gain as you see in the menu. But for cursor interactions, I used like acceleration. So it depends again on.
Acceleration is on the cursor.
Yeah,